You think you know the city. You see the skyline, the glittering towers of glass that scrape the belly of the clouds. The clean parks where people walk their designer dogs. The coffee shops where a latte costs more than a minimum wage hour. You think that is the reality, but you are wrong. That is just the skin. I work in the guts, down here, beneath the asphalt and the concrete foundations. There is another world. It is a labyrinth of brick and rusted steel, a subterranean network that stretches for thousands of miles like a tangled nest of snakes. It is the Undercity, and like any gut, it is full of filth. When you flush your toilet, when you empty your sink, when the rain washes the oil and the spit and the trash off the streets. It all comes down to me. My name is Jack, and I am a subterranean maintenance technician for the Department of Sanitation. That is the polite title on my pay stub. In reality, I am a professional turd herder. I wade through the things you have forgotten. I have seen dead bodies wrapped in carpet. I have seen alligators, small ones, mostly pets flush when they got too big, rotting in the fatbergs. I have found wedding rings, murder weapons, and enough syringes to kill a blue whale. You get desensitized to it. The smell, a cloying mix of sulfur, rot, and old copper, just becomes the air you breathe. The darkness becomes your home. But there are rules down here. The handbook they give you on day one is thick, heavy, and mostly useless. It tells you about methane pockets that can explode if you strike a spark. It tells you about flash floods that can turn a dry tunnel into a drowning machine in 30 seconds. It tells you about the rats, which down here grow to the size of terriers and have no fear of man. However, the real rules are passed down in whispers. They are told to you by the old-timers, the guys like Sully, whose skin has turned a permanent shade of gray from lack of sun, and whose lungs wheeze like a broken accordion. My first day, Sully took me to the edge of Sector 4, an old Victorian-era tunnel made of red brick that wept black slime. He grabbed my shoulder with a grip like a vice, his eyes milky with cataracts but sharp with fear locked onto mine. "Listen to me, rookie," he rasped, the smoke from his cigarette dancing in the beam of his headlamp. "You're gonna see things down here that don't make sense. You ignore the shadows. You ignore the voices in the pipes. It's just the wind. But there is one thing you do not ignore." He pointed a crooked finger into the darkness. "If you see a balloon, a red balloon, floating in the water, you stop. You do not touch it. You do not try to pop it. You turn around, you walk the other way, and you pray to whatever God you believe in that it didn't feel your heat." I laughed. I couldn't help it. It sounded like a bad joke, a reference to that clown movie everyone saw as a kid. "A red balloon, Sully. What? Is there a circus down here?" Sully didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just stared at me until my laughter died in my throat. "It ain't rubber, kid," he whispered. "And it ain't filled with helium. Just promise me." "Don't touch the red ones." I promised. I thought he was hazing me. I thought he was crazy. But 6 months later, deep in the bowels of the city, miles away from the sun, I realized that Sully wasn't telling me a ghost story. He was giving me a survival guide. Because down here, red isn't a color. Red is a warning. And those things aren't balloons. They are eggs. The first month on the job is always the hardest. It's not the physical labor, though hauling 50 pounds of gear through knee-deep sludge is brutal. It's the sensory overload. Your brain isn't wired to process the sheer volume of waste that flows beneath a metropolis. The air is thick, humid, and heavy. It tastes metallic. You wear a mask, but the smell permeates your clothes, your hair, your skin. You go home, scrub yourself raw in the shower, and you can still smell it when you lie in bed. It's the scent of a million people living, consuming, and excreting. Sully was my anchor in the muck. He was a man carved out of granite and bad decisions. Had been working the drains for 30 years. Since back when they still sent people down without gas monitors. He moved through the tunnels with a strange loping grace, knowing exactly which bricks were loose and which puddles were deep enough to swallow a man whole. "Watch your step there, Hollywood," Ed grunt, grabbing my harness before I stepped into an innocent-looking patch of water. "That's a scour hole. Drop into that, and the suction will pull your boots off before it drowns you." He called me Hollywood, because I had all my teeth and still had hope in my eyes. He said the drains would take both eventually. We were a two-man team assigned to roving maintenance. That meant we went where the sensors tripped. Most days it was clearing fatbergs, massive, concreted lumps of congealed grease and wet wipes that clogged the arteries of the city. It was grueling work. Wednesday hack at the white, waxy masses with pickaxes. Sweat pouring down our backs inside our rubber suits, while the water rushed around our waists. You know what this is? Sully asked one Tuesday, kicking a chunk of gray sludge. This is the city's cholesterol. People think they can flush their problems away. Pour the grease down the sink, flush the wipes. But it all ends up here. Nothing ever really goes away, Jack. It just changes form. It was a philosophical point that was hard to appreciate when you were standing in it, but Sully had a point. The drains were a graveyard of artifacts. We found wallets, dentures, toys once. We found a prosthetic leg. We never found the owner. Despite his gruff exterior, Sully was protective. He checked my oxygen levels every 20 minutes. He made sure I ate lunch in the dry zones. Elevated concrete platforms near the ventilation shafts, where the air was marginally fresher. He taught me the rhythm of the underground. Listen, he said, holding up a hand during a lunch break. We sat in the dark, the only light coming from our headlamps. Hear that? I listened. I heard the rush of water, the drip of condensation, the distant rumble of a subway train passing overhead. The water, Sully said, it sings. When it's rushing, it's angry. When it's still, that's when you worry. Still water breeds things. Like mosquitoes? I asked, taking a bite of my sandwich. Sully looked at me, his face shadowed. The biology down here is isolated. It evolves on its own. No sunlight, plenty of food. Things get weird in the dark, Hollywood. Things get hungry. He crushed his cigarette out on the concrete. We got a ticket for Sector 4 today. The sensors are reading a blockage in the main overflow. Probably just another grease mountain. But keep your eyes open. That sector is old. The brickwork is crumbling. And the acoustics are tricky. You hear something, you tell me. I nodded, packing up my lunch. I didn't know it then, but that sandwich was the last normal meal I would ever eat. We stood up, clicked our lights to high beam, and waded back into the black water. We were heading for Sector 4. We were heading into the nest. Sector 4 was different. You could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the moment we crossed the threshold from the modern concrete pipes into the older infrastructure. The transition was abrupt. The smooth, cylindrical tunnels of the 1990s gave way to arched ceilings of hand-laid red brick, slick with a century of moss and grime. This was the Victorian spine of the city, built by men who used candles and canaries to survive. The air here was colder, damper. The sound of our boots sloshing through the water echoed differently, a sharper, hollower slap that seemed to travel for miles in both directions. But the most unsettling change was the smell. The usual sewage stench, that heavy fecal odor, faded. In its place was something sweet. It was cloying and thick, like rotting peaches mixed with the sharp tang of copper. It reminded me of a butcher shop that had been left open in a heat wave, masked by heavy perfume. "Masks up," Sully ordered, his voice muffled as he pulled his respirator tight. "I don't like that smell. Could be chemical runoff. Maybe a candy factory dumped a vat illegally." I adjusted my mask, the rubber sealing against my face, but the smell seemed to seep through the filters. It sat heavy on my tongue. "It's quiet," I noted, my voice sounding tinny in my ears. Sully stopped. He swept his headlamp beam across the water. The surface was black and oily, moving sluggishly. "Too quiet," he muttered. "Where are the rats?" I looked around. He was right. In the upper sectors, red eyes reflected our lights from every ledge and pipe opening. The rats were constant companions, scurrying along the conduit lines, fighting over scraps. Here, the ledges were empty. There were no squeaks, no scrabbling claws. The tunnel was devoid of life. Maybe the gas drove them out, I suggested, though my gauge read normal oxygen levels and zero methane. "Rats don't leave because of a smell," Sully said, wading forward. "Rats leave because something is eating them." We pushed on, the water rising to our thighs. The current was stronger here, pulling at our legs with insistent fingers. The sensor indicated the blockage was another 200 yards ahead, around a sharp bend in the tunnel, known as the Devil's Elbow. As we walked, I noticed the debris in the water changing. In the upper levels, it was trash. Wrappers, bottles, paper here. The water carried organic matter. Strange, pale clumps of fibrous material floated past us, looking like wet wool or spider webs. I reached out and poked one with the handle of my shovel. It was soft, gelatinous. It broke apart instantly, dissolving into a milky cloud. "Don't play with the scum," Sully snapped, though he didn't look back. "Keep moving." We rounded the Devil's Elbow. The tunnel widened into a massive overflow chamber. A cathedral of brick rising 30 feet above us. Shadows stretched long and distorted against the curved walls. In the center of the chamber, the water churned around a central pillar. And there, caught in an eddy of the current, was the blockage. It wasn't grease. It wasn't trash. It was a mass of tangled roots, or what looked like roots. Pale white tendrils hung from the ceiling, dragging in the water, catching the debris and forming a dam. It looked like a willow tree made of meat hanging upside down. "What the hell is that?" I whispered. Sully shone his light upward. The roots originated from a cluster of dark patches on the ceiling bricks, mold, fungus. "Whatever it is, we gotta clear it," Sully said, though he sounded hesitant. "The water's backing up. If a storm hits, this chamber floods in 10 minutes. He unhooked his pike pole. I did the same. We waded closer to the mass. The sweet smell was overpowering here, even through the masks. My stomach turned. I looked down at the water swirling around my waist. Something red caught the light of my headlamp. It was bobbing gently in the dark water, just behind the mass of roots. It looked perfectly round, perfectly smooth. "Sully," I said, my voice trembling. "I think I see something." Sully froze. He didn't look at the roots. He looked at me. "What color is it, Jack?" "It's red." Sully grabbed my arm, yanking me back so hard I almost lost my footing. "Don't move," he hissed. "Don't create a wake." I stared at the object. It floated closer, spinning slowly. It looked exactly like a red balloon, the kind you'd see at a birthday party, tethered to a mailbox. But there was no string, and it wasn't floating on the water. It was floating in it, submerged yet buoyant. And then, as it rotated, I saw the side that had been facing away from us. It wasn't smooth. It had veins, pulsing, blue veins that throbbed in time with a rhythm I couldn't hear. "It's alive," I whispered. "It's a lure," Sully corrected, backing us away slowly, and we just walked right into the tackle box. The silence in the overflow chamber was absolute, broken only by the wet slap of water against the brickwork, and the rasp of our breathing inside the respirators. The red sphere bobbed in the current, just 10 feet away from us. It was mesmerizing. The color was a deep visceral crimson, illuminated by the harsh LEDs of our headlamps. It looked like a drop of blood suspended in oil, magnified 1,000 times. My brain struggled to categorize it. Balloon, it insisted, toy, trash. But my eyes saw the truth. The surface of the sphere wasn't rubber or plastic. It was a semi-translucent membrane, stretched taut over something fluid. The blue veins I had spotted were intricate, branching like a river delta across the curved surface. They pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat. Thump, thump, thump. That seemed to vibrate the water around it. "Sully," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What is that?" Sully didn't answer immediately. He was backing us up, step by agonizingly slow step, his eyes never leaving the sphere. "It's a drifter," he finally murmured. "I haven't seen one in Sector 4 since '98. They usually stay deeper in the sub-basements." "A drifter?" I echoed. "Is it an animal?" "It's a sensor," Sully corrected grimly. "Think of it like a mine, but instead of exploding, it calls for backup." I watched the thing spin. It seemed to be tracking us, rotating to keep the vein side facing our lights. Or maybe it was sensing our heat. The water around my legs felt colder suddenly. Or maybe it was just a chill of fear settling into my bones. "We need to clear the blockage," I said, my logic trying to override my instinct to run. "That's the job, Sully. If we don't clear those roots..." The sector floods. Forget the roots, Sully snapped. If we touch that water too hard, if we make a splash, that thing triggers. And if it triggers, the roots aren't going to be our problem. As if hearing him, the sphere stopped bobbing. It went perfectly still. The pulsing of the veins accelerated. Thump, 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 thump. The red glow seemed to intensify, lighting up the murky water around it like a warning beacon. I took a step back, my boots slipping on a slick patch of moss. My arms flailed for balance. My pike pole, which I was still clutching in my right hand, swung wide. The metal tip hit the brick wall with a sharp clang. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. The red sphere reacted instantly. It didn't explode. It shrieked. It wasn't a sound I thought a biological organism could make. It was a high-frequency vibration that hit me in the teeth before I heard it with my ears. It was the sound of rubbing wet glass, amplified to a deafening volume. My vision blurred. The water around the sphere began to boil, not with heat, but with vibration. "Run," Sully yelled. He grabbed my harness and shoved me back toward the tunnel entrance. But I was frozen. I watched as the sphere began to unravel. The membrane split open, not popping, but peeling back like the petals of a blooming flower. From inside the red sac, a cloud of fine, black particulate exploded into the water. It looked like ink spreading rapidly, clouding the current. "Don't breathe," Sully screamed, shoving me again. "Don't let the water touch your skin." We scrambled back around the devil's elbow, splashing frantically through the thigh-deep muck. Behind us, the water in the chamber began to churn violently. The sweet copper smell intensified 100-fold, becoming so thick it made my eyes water behind the mask. We didn't stop until we reached the maintenance platform, a rusted steel grate elevated 5 feet above the waterline. We clambered up, gasping for air, our chests heaving. I ripped my mask off, needing raw air, even if it smelled like death. "What the hell was that?" I demanded, wiping slime from my face. "What was inside it?" Sully kept his mask on, staring back down the dark tunnel toward the bend. His hands were shaking as he lit a cigarette, the flame of his lighter trembling. "Spores," he said, his voice hollow. "It released spores, it marked the water." "Marked it for what?" Sully looked at me, his face pale in the gloom. "For the rest of them. You rang the dinner bell, Jack, and now everything in this system knows exactly where we are." I looked down at the water flowing past our platform. It was no longer black. Streaks of red dye were swirling in the current, mixing with the sewage, and in the distance, echoing from the pipes deep below us, I heard a sound. It was a low, heavy thud. Then another like heavy footsteps approaching underwater. Thud, thud, thud. "They're coming," Sully whispered. "We need to move. Now." We sat on the rusted maintenance platform, the grate digging into our thighs, listening to the echoes of the Undercity. The platform was a small island of safety, a 5x5 steel cage bolted into the brickwork of the tunnel wall, accessible by a ladder that was missing half its rungs. Below us, the water rushed by, black and swift, carrying the red streaks of the burst the balloon further downstream. Sully smoked his cigarette with a frantic intensity, inhaling deep enough to burn his lungs. The smoke pooled around us in the stagnant air, forming a gray halo in our headlamp beams. "Okay," I said, my voice shaking as I tried to process what I had just seen. "Okay, Sully, talk to me. You said drifters. You said sensors. Is this some kind of government experiment? Is it chemical waste mutating the wildlife?" Sully laughed, a dry barking sound that turned into a cough. "Government, kid. The government doesn't know this exists. Or if they do, they're smart enough to stay out of it. This isn't science. It's evolution." He pointed his glowing cigarette tip at the water below. "Think about what goes down these drains. Everything. Antibiotics, hormones, industrial runoff, bleach, blood, dead pets, raw sewage. It's a chemical soup. You leave that to simmer in the dark for 100 years. Things happen. Life finds a way, right? But down here, life doesn't need sunlight. It needs biomass." "So the balloons, they're eggs?" I asked, remembering my initial thought. "Not eggs, Sully corrected. More like eyes or fingertips. They belong to something bigger, the colony. He took a drag and exhaled slowly. The colony lies deep. Sector 1, Sector 0. The places where the pipes are so old, they're made of wood and stone. It's a single organism, Jack. A massive fungal meat hybrid that grafts itself into the infrastructure. It grows along the pipes, filters the water, eats the waste. My stomach churned. The image of a living sewer system was horrifying. So it's cleaning the water, in a way. It eats the filth, but when it gets hungry, or when it wants to expand, it sends out the drifters. They float upstream, they look for new territory, they look for food, and they react to vibration. He looked at me pointedly, like a metal pike hitting a brick wall. So what happens now? I asked, looking at the dark tunnel stretching ahead of us. We go back, right? We leave, we call hazmat. Sully shook his head. We can't go back the way we came. The burst drifter released pheromones into the water. If we wade through that, we'll smell like food. Anything downstream is going to be swimming up toward us right now. The rats, the gators, and the workers. The things that hatch when the colony needs to eat. You don't want to meet a worker in the water, Jack. They're fast, and they don't have eyes, just teeth. He stood up, groaning as his knees popped. Our only way out is forward, past the overflow chamber. There's an emergency access ladder in Section 4B that leads up to the subway maintenance tunnels. It's dry. If we can get there, we can get out. But the blockage, I argued. The roots, the other balloons. We'll have to be quiet, Sully said. Quieter than you've ever been in your life. We stick to the ledges. No splashing, no talking. We ghost it. I looked at my boots, caked in slime. I looked at the dark water. The rhythmic thumping sound I had heard earlier, the thud, was still there, faint but consistent. It sounded like a pile driver working miles away, or a massive heart beating in the earth. What is that sound? I asked. Sully paused, cocking his head. The color drained from his face, visible even under the grime. That's not the workers, he whispered. That's the pumps. The water pumps? Number the storm pumps on the surface. He looked up at the brick ceiling, searching for cracks. It must be raining hard up top. Really hard. If the automated system kicked on the auxiliary pumps, that means the reservoir is full. As if on cue, a siren began to wail in the distance. It was a mournful mechanical sound that echoed down the pipes, distorting into a ghost's cry. Whoop! Whoop! Sully dropped his cigarette. He stomped it out, his eyes wide. Flash flood warning, he said. The floodgates are closing. We're not just being hunted, Jack. We're about to be drowned. He grabbed his pack. Move now. If the water rises before we reach the ladder, we're going to be swimming with the drifters. We scrambled off the platform, back into the waist-deep water. The current had picked up speed. It tugged at us, heavy and insistent. And now, the water wasn't just carrying sewage. It was carrying more red spheres. Dozens of them, bobbing silently past us in the dark, heading downstream toward the scent of the burst spore. We were walking against the migration, and we had nowhere to hide. The siren continued to wail, a relentless mechanical scream that bounced off the curved brick walls and drilled into our skulls. Woo! It was the sound of a city, sealing its veins. Up above, the automated flood control systems were detecting the surge of stormwater from the streets. Massive steel blast doors, thick enough to stop a tank, were slamming shut at key junctions to divert the flow into the holding reservoirs. We were in the reservoir. Move it! Sully yelled over the siren, abandoning his earlier caution about noise. The gates seal in 5 minutes. If we're stuck in Sector 4 when the surge hits, the pressure alone will crush us. We slogged through the water, fighting the current. It was no longer waist deep. It was rising fast, lapping at my chest. The rainstorm on the surface must have been torrential. The water was colder now, mixed with fresh runoff, but it still carried that sickly sweet copper smell of the colony. The ladder. Sully pointed his beam ahead, just past the junction. We rounded the bend, slipping on the slick floor. The junction was a massive intersection where three main tunnels met. In the center, a rusted iron-rung ladder climbed the wall toward a circular hatch 30 feet above. But as we approached, a metallic clang reverberated through the tunnel, shaking dust from the ceiling. Then another clang. Ahead of us, a heavy steel grate began to descend from the ceiling, sliding down rusted tracks. It was the sector isolation gate. No! 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 Sully screamed, splashing forward, trying to reach it before it closed. He was too late. With a final, ground-shaking thud, the gate slammed into the floor, sealing off the tunnel ahead. The ladder was on the other side. We stood there, chest deep in rushing water, staring at the wall of steel bars. The gaps between them were maybe 4 inches wide, too small for a man, but big enough for the water to rush through. "Is there a manual override?" I shouted, panic rising in my throat like bile. On the other side, Sully slammed his fist against the bars. "Damn it! The sensors must have tripped early because of the blockage." He turned, his headlamp sweeping the tunnel we were now trapped in. "We're locked in Sector 4. The only way out is the overflow release, but that's back the way we came, past the nest." The water continued to rise. It was at my armpits now. I had to tilt my head back to keep my mouth clear of the muck. "Look," I whispered, pointing my light at the water flowing through the grate from the other side. Debris was piling up against the bars. Branches, plastic bottles, dead rats, and mixed in with the trash were the balloons, dozens of them. Red, pulsing, vein spheres, caught against the steel bars by the current. They were piling up, forming a wall of quivering red flesh. As they touched each other, their veins pulsed in unison. Thump, thump, thump. The bioluminescence was brighter now, casting a hellish red glow over the water. "They're gathering," Sully said, his voice low. "The current is washing them down here. We're trapped in a dead end with them." The siren finally cut off, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. But the silence was quickly filled by another sound, from the tunnel behind us. The direction of the nest came a wet, slithering noise. It sounded like wet leather dragging across concrete. Slap, drag, slap, drag. "Something's coming," I said, backing up against the cold steel of the gate. Sully turned his light back the way we came. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the rising water, far down the tunnel. Something large broke the surface. It was pale, sleek, and moved with terrifying speed. It dove back under before we could see it clearly. "The workers," Sully whispered. "They smell the spores. They're coming to feed." We were pinned. Behind us, the gate blocked by a wall of living mines. In front of us, the hunters approaching in the dark, and all around us, the water rising, inch by cold inch. "Up," Sully commanded, looking at the ceiling. "We have to get high. The conduit pipes." He pointed to a cluster of PVC and metal pipes running along the ceiling arch, maybe 5 feet above the current water level. "Climb the gate, get on the pipes, it's our only chance." We grabbed the slimy steel bars of the gate, careful not to touch the red balloons clustered at the bottom, and began to climb. We scrambled up out of the water, balancing precariously on the rusted brackets, pressing our backs against the ceiling. From our perch, we looked down. The water below was churning, and now, in the red glow of the drifters, we saw shapes moving beneath the surface. Long, pale, and hungry, perched on the conduit pipes, pressed against the cold. Damp bricks of the tunnel ceiling. We were safe from the water for now, but safety was a relative term when you were suspended over a soup of biological horrors. The air up here was thin and stale, smelling of rust and that pervasive, sweet rot. My legs burned from the strain of balancing on the slick PVC, and my fingers ached from gripping the brackets. Below us, the water level had stabilized, filling the tunnel to about 3/4 capacity. The current swirled around the gate, pushing more and more of the red drifters against the bars. There were hundreds of them now, a solid wall of pulsating crimson. The bioluminescent glow they emitted was strong enough to light up the tunnel without our headlamps. It turned the black water into a river of blood. "Turn off your light," Sully whispered, his voice barely a breath. "Save the battery, and don't give them a target." I clicked my headlamp off. The darkness didn't come. Instead, the red glow from below bathed everything in a monochromatic nightmare. Sully's face looked like a skull painted in blood. The shadows danced violently on the walls. And then, the sound started again. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't the pumps this time. It wasn't the machinery of the city. It was coming from the water right below us. I looked down. The drifters clustered against the gate were pulsing, but they weren't just glowing, they were vibrating. They were beating like a massive collective heart. Thump, thump. "They're sinking up," Sully murmured. "They're calling out." "Calling out to what?" I asked. Though I feared the answer, Sully pointed a trembling finger toward the dark water further down the tunnel, away from the gate. Ripples were spreading across the surface, moving against the current. Something was responding to the beat. Slap. Drag slap. The noise grew louder. A shape emerged from the water, climbing onto a narrow ledge of brickwork that was still dry. It was pale, roughly the size of a large dog. But its anatomy was all wrong. It looked like a cross between a naked mole rat and a spider crab. It had no eyes, just a smooth fleshy dome for a head. Its mouth was a vertical slit running down its chest, lined with rows of translucent, needle-like teeth. Its limbs were long and multi-jointed, ending in hooked claws that scraped against the brick. A worker, it chittered, a sound like grinding stones, and turned its head side to side. It was blind, hunting by vibration. Then a second one crawled up, then a third. They moved with a jerky, insectoid twitching. "Don't move," Sully mouthed. "Don't even breathe." The workers crept along the walls, sniffing the air with long, waving antennae. They were drawn to the gate, to the mass of drifters. They began to feast. One of the creatures reached out with a claw and snagged a red balloon from the pile. It brought the sphere to its chest mouth and bit down. The balloon popped with a wet squelch, releasing a cloud of gas. The worker shuddered, convulsing in what looked like ecstasy, absorbing the gas and the fluids. "They eat the unfertilized ones," Sully whispered. "It's a cycle. The colony produces the drifters. The workers eat them to gain energy to build more nest. It was a horrific ecosystem, but as long as they were eating the balloons, they weren't eating us." Then disaster. My foot slipped. Just an inch. The rubber sole of my boot squeaked against the wet PVC pipe. Scree EK. It was a tiny sound. In a subway station, you wouldn't have heard it. Here, in the echoing brick chamber, it sounded like a scream. The workers stopped feeding. All three heads snapped upward, toward the ceiling, toward us. The thumping of the drifters stopped instantly. The red glow seemed to dim, then flare bright white. The workers hissed in unison. They began to climb the walls, their claws finding purchase in the crumbling mortar. They moved fast, skittering up the vertical brickwork like spiders. "They heard us," I yelled, abandoning stealth. "Sully, they're coming up." Sully roared, pulling his heavy wrench from his belt. "Don't let them get a grip." The first creature reached the pipe Sully was on. It swiped a claw at his boot. Sully swung the wrench, connecting with a sickening crack against the creature's skull. It shrieked and fell back into the water with a splash. But the splash was the worst thing that could have happened. The impact of the worker hitting the water sent a shockwave through the cluster of drifters. HSSSSS. The drifters against the gate didn't pop. They screamed. A chorus of high-pitched wails erupted from the red mass. The sound was paralyzing. It vibrated my teeth, blurred my vision, and from the darkness of the tunnel behind the workers, the water erupted. More of them, dozens, swarming over each other, climbing the walls, dropping from the ceiling, a tide of pale flesh and clicking claws. "We can't fight them all," Sully yelled. "The gate, we have to go through the gate. It's locked. The top." Sully pointed. "There is a gap above the water line, between the bars and the arch." It was a tiny gap, maybe 12 inches high. We would have to squeeze through, suspended over the feeding frenzy below. "Go," Sully shoved me. "It'll hold them back." I scrambled along the pipe, reaching for the top of the steel gate. Below me, a worker leaped from the wall, its claws grazing my ankle. I kicked it in the face and hauled myself toward the gap. I squeezed my head and shoulders through the space between the steel and the brick. It was tight. My chest scraped raw. I pulled, wriggling through like a worm. I tumbled down the other side, splashing into the water on the safe side of the gate. I stood up, gasping, and turned back. Sully was still on the pipes. He was swinging his wrench wieldy, surrounded by 5 of the creatures. They were swarming him. "Sully, jump!" I screamed. He looked at me. Blood was streaming down his face from a cut on his forehead. He grinned, a gruesome expression in the red light. "Not today, Hollywood," he grunted. He didn't jump toward me, he jumped down, into the mass of drifters. He landed in the middle of the red pile. The impact was massive. Boom! Hundreds of balloons burst at once. A massive cloud of red gas exploded upward, engulfing Sully and the workers. Sully didn't scream, he just disappeared into the red fog. "Sully," I watched in horror as the gas cleared. The workers were floating in the water, twitching, paralyzed. Sully was gone, dragged under. I was alone, and the thumping in the pipes was getting louder. The water on my side of the gate was calmer, but the air was choked with the metallic tang of the spore cloud, drifting through the bars. I scrambled backward, away from the carnage, my boots slipping on the slimy floor. I didn't want to see what was happening to Sully. I didn't want to know if the paralysis was permanent, or if the workers would wake up hungry. I was alone. My headlamp was flickering, the battery drained by the cold and the age of the unit. The beam cast erratic strobe-like shadows on the walls as I stumbled deeper into Sector 4B. The map in my head, the one Sully had tried to drill into me, was fragmented by panic, access ladder, junction, subway maintenance. The tunnel here was narrower, the ceiling lower. I had to hunch over to keep from scraping my helmet. The water was receding slightly, thanks to the drainage gradient, but the sludge was thicker, darker. It felt like walking through molasses. Ahead, the tunnel opened up into a vast circular chamber. I stopped at the entrance, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't on any map. It was a cistern easily 100 feet across, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into darkness, but it wasn't empty. It was a garden. From the water level up to the highest bricks I could see, the walls were covered in a thick, pulsating mat of biological matter. It looked like the interior of a lung, pink, wet, and glistening. Veins the size of fire hoses ran along the walls, pumping blue fluid to thousands of sacs hanging from the ceiling. The drifters, the red balloons. There were thousands of them. They hung in clusters like grapes, dripping slime into the water below. They were in various stages of development. Some were small and pale pink, others were the deep, angry crimson I had seen before, and some were translucent. Inside the clear ones I could see shadows curling. Embryos. This wasn't just a filter. It was a nursery. I covered my mouth to stifle a whimper. The scale of it was impossible. This thing, this colony, must have been growing here for decades. Maybe a century, unnoticed by the world above. It was farming us, or preparing to. I scanned the room for an exit. On the far side, across the dark, still water of the cistern, I saw a rusted iron catwalk. It led to a heavy steel door set into the wall, the subway maintenance access. It was my only way out, but between me and that catwalk lay 100 feet of open water, and floating in that water were hundreds of loose drifters, bobbing gently, waiting I couldn't swim. Not in this gear and not without disturbing the water. I had to wait. Slowly, I stepped into the cistern. The water rose to my chest immediately. It was warm here. Unnaturally warm, like bathwater. Thump thump. The sound was deafening in here. It was coming from the walls, from the water, from the thousands of eggs beating in unison. It was a hypnotic rhythm. I felt my own heart trying to sync with it, skipping beats to match the tempo of the monsters. I moved inch by inch. My eyes were locked on the nearest cluster of floating balloons. They were 10 feet away. If I created a wake, they would drift toward me. If I touched one, I took a step. The water rippled. A red sphere turned slowly, its veins pulsing brighter. It floated a few inches closer. I froze. I waited for the ripple to die down. I took another step, halfway across. My foot snagged on something submerged. I almost fell, flailing my arms to catch my balance. I made a splash. Hiss. The sound came from the ceiling. I looked up. One of the large translucent sacs directly above me was tearing open. Slime poured out, and then something dropped. It landed in the water 5 feet from me with a heavy plop. It wasn't a worker. It was small or pale and looked like a human hand with too many fingers. It scuttled across the surface of the water, moving like a water strider insect, heading straight for me. A hatchling. I panicked. I lunged forward, abandoning stealth. The wake I created sent the floating drifters spinning. They began to drift toward me, drawn by the turbulence. The hatchling jumped. It landed on my chest, its gripping claws digging into my rubber suit. It had no face, just a lamprey-like mouth full of teeth. It began to chew on the rubber. I screamed, batting it away. It flew into the water, shrieking. The shriek woke the room. The thousands of eggs on the ceiling began to glow brighter, shifting from red to blinding white. The veins pumped furiously. The thumping accelerated into a frantic drumbeat. Thump, 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 thump. The water around me began to boil with movement. Hatchlings were dropping from the ceiling like rain. Plop, plop, plop. I was 20 feet from the catwalk. I tried to run, but the water held me back. I was surrounded. I reached the ladder leading up to the catwalk just as the first wave of drifters reached me. I holed myself up, kicking at the hatchlings that were trying to climb my legs. I collapsed onto the rusted metal grating, gasping for air. Below me, the water was a churning mass of pale limbs and red spheres. I had made it to the catwalk, but the steel door, the exit, was sealed, and it had a keypad. I didn't have the code, and behind me, rising from the center of the cistern, a massive shape began to break the surface. The mother was waking up. The catwalk vibrated beneath me. A rusted steel ribbon suspended over the biological nightmare below. The thumping rhythm of the cistern had reached a fever pitch, a deafening industrial drumbeat that rattled my teeth. Below, the water turned white with the frenzy of the hatchlings and the workers swarming toward my scent. But it was the thing rising in the center that froze the blood in my veins. It was immense, a mound of flesh, the size of a garbage truck, pushed through the surface tension of the black water. It had no defined shape. It was a rolling, undulating mass of tumors and muscle, slick with mucus. Countless red eyes, identical to the drifters, but the size of dinner plates, opened across its surface, blinking wetly in the gloom. They focused on me. I scrambled backward on the grate, my heels scraping against the metal, until my back hit the cold steel of the sealed door. The keypad mocked me with a blinking red light. Locked. Think, Jack, think. I screamed at myself, my voice lost in the cacophony of shrieks rising from the pit. Sully knew the codes. He had mentioned a universal override for the maintenance hatches, something the old-timers used. What was it? A date. A station number. 1904. The year the subway broke ground. It was a guess, a desperate memory of a trivia fact Sully had mumbled over a sandwich weeks ago. I punched the numbers into the keypad with trembling fingers. 1904. Beep beep. Error. The mother let out a sound. A low resonant moan that vibrated the catwalk so violently. I almost fell over the railing. A tendril of wet flesh, thick as a tree trunk, lashed out from the central mass. It smashed into the support pillar of the catwalk 10 feet to my left. Metal screamed as the pillar buckled. The entire section of the walkway tilted dangerously. I grabbed the railing, dangling over the pit below. The hatchlings leaped from the water, snapping their jaws at my boots. I pulled myself back up to the keypad. Try again. Think. Sulla's employee ID. Number the sector number. Sector 4. I tried 0004. Beep beep. Error. The tendril lashed out again. Closer this time. It hit the railing just inches from my leg, bending the steel like a pipe cleaner. The impact knocked the wind out of me. I looked down at the writhing mass. The mother was pulling herself up, climbing the support columns. She was coming for me. And then I saw it, scratched into the paint of the doorframe, barely visible under layers of grime and rust. A series of tally marks. But they weren't tally marks. They were numbers etched by someone who had been trapped here before. 5318. I didn't question it. I didn't wonder who carved it or if they survived. I punched it in. 5318. Click, hiss. The hydraulic seal disengaged. The heavy steel door popped open an inch. I grabbed the handle and hauled it open, throwing myself through the gap just as a massive wet slam rocked the door from the outside. The mother had struck the spot where I'd been standing a second ago. I slammed the door shut and spun the locking wheel, my muscles burning with adrenaline. Something heavy thudded against the metal from the other side. Once, twice, then silence, save for the muffled, angry vibrations of the colony. I collapsed on the floor, gasping for air. The room I was in was dry. It was a concrete utility corridor, lit by flickering fluorescent strips that buzzed like angry hornets. The air here was cooler, smelling of ozone and dust instead of rot. I was safe, or so I thought. I stood up. Checking my gear, my suit was shredded. My oxygen tank was dented. I reached for my water bottle to wash the taste of bile from my mouth, but my hand brushed against something wet on my thigh. I looked down. Stuck to the leg of my rubber waders, clinging tenaciously with a mucus-like adhesive, was a single, small red sphere. It was the size of a marble, a hatchling egg. I must have picked it up when I scrambled onto the catwalk. It hadn't burst. It was intact. And it was pulsing. Thump thump, panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my exhaustion. Sulla's rule echoed in my mind. Do not touch the red balloons. I grabbed my utility knife. I had to scrape it off. I had to get it off me before it hatched or released spores. I brought the blade down, careful to slide it under the adhesive sac. But my hand was shaking. The adrenaline crash had left me jittery. The knife slipped. The tip of the blade nicked the red membrane. Pisches eshtite. A tiny jet of crimson gas sprayed out, hitting me directly in the face. It bypassed my mask filters, which were clogged with slime. I inhaled it. It tasted like copper and sugar. I staggered back, dropping the knife. I coughed, hacking violently, trying to expel the gas. My lungs burned. My vision swam with red spots. No, I wheezed. No, no, no. I clawed at my chest. I expected pain. I expected to suffocate. Instead, a feeling of intense, euphoric warmth spread through my body. The fear vanished. The panic dissolved. My heartbeat slowed, syncing perfectly with the thumping in my head. Thump, thump, thump. I looked at the door I had just locked. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I shouldn't have locked it. Why would I lock it? My family was on the other side. The mother was there. She was singing to me. I reached for the locking wheel. My hand moved on its own, trembling not with fear, but with anticipation. Open it, the voice in my head whispered. Let them in. I gripped the wheel. I started to turn it. And then a spark of my own mind fought back. Jack, wake up. It's the spores. I screamed, slapping my own face, biting my tongue until I tasted real blood. The pain snapped me back for a second. The euphoria flickered. I stumbled away from the door, crashing into the opposite wall. I had to move. I had to get away from the influence of the mother before I lost control again. I ran down the utility corridor, staggering like a drunk, fighting the urge to turn around and surrender to the hive. The infection was in me. I was a ticking clock. The utility corridor stretched out before me, a sterile tunnel of gray concrete, and flickering lights that felt alien after the organic nightmare of the cistern. But the real nightmare was inside me now, the red gas I had inhaled. The concentrated essence of the colony was working through my bloodstream with terrifying efficiency. It wasn't like a virus. A virus makes you sick. This made me feel connected. Every step was a battle. My legs wanted to stop. My muscles twitched, fighting my brain's commands. A phantom sensation rippled across my skin, like thousands of tiny insects crawling beneath the surface. The sweet, coppery taste in my mouth intensified until it was all I could taste. Drowning out the ozone and dust. Turn back, the voice whispered. It wasn't a voice I heard with my ears. It was a thought implanted directly into my limbic system. The water is warm. The mother is waiting. Get out of my head, I screamed, my voice cracking. I slammed my shoulder into the concrete wall, using the pain to anchor myself. I stumbled past a row of electrical panels marked with the city's transit logo. This was the subway maintenance level. If I could find a station access, I could get to the tracks. From there, a platform, people, help. But as I ran, my body began to change. It started with my left hand, the hand that had held the knife. I looked down and saw the veins beneath my skin darkening. They weren't blue anymore. They were shifting to a deep, angry crimson. They bulged against the skin, throbbing in time with that relentless thump-thump rhythm that echoed in my skull. Then came the heat. A fever spiked in me, sudden and violent. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes. I tore at the collar of my suit, ripping the rubber to expose my neck to the cool air. I caught my reflection in the glass of a fire extinguisher cabinet. My eyes, the whites were gone. The sclera had turned a milky, translucent pink. The pupils were dilated so wide they were almost black holes. I looked like one of them. I fell to my knees, dry heaving bile and blood onto the floor. The urge to return to the cistern was overpowering now. It felt like homesickness, multiplied by 1,000. It felt like love. "Why do you run?" the voice asked, gentle and insidious. "We are only hungry. We are only growing. I am not food," I gasped, forcing myself to stand. I saw a sign ahead, emergency exit station, 200 meters, station 9. That was the abandoned spur line, the one they closed in the 80s. It wasn't active, but it had surface access. I limped toward it. My vision was tunneling. The edges of my sight were bleeding red. Suddenly, the corridor ahead blurred. The concrete floor seemed to ripple. I blinked. Rubbing my eyes, a figure was standing in front of the exit door. It wasn't a worker. It was a man. He was wearing a tattered sanitation uniform, identical to mine. He stood with his back to me, his head bowed. "Sully," I whispered, hope flaring in my chest despite the impossibility. "Sully, you made it." The figure didn't move. "Sully," I staggered closer. "We need to go. I'm infected. I need help." The figure slowly turned around. It was Sully, but it wasn't. His skin had turned the color of wet parchment. His eyes were gone, replaced by two bulging red spheres that pushed out from his sockets. His mouth hung open, jaw unhinged, and from the darkness of his throat, a thick, blue tendril protruded, waving gently in the air like a feeler. He had been assimilated. "In minutes. Join us, Jack," Sully's voice said, but his lips didn't move. The sound vibrated from the red spheres in his eyes. He took a step toward me. His movement was jerky, puppeteered by the organism inside him. He raised a hand, and I saw that his fingers had fused together, forming a fleshy paddle. "No," I whimpered, backing away. "Sully, please." He lunged. He was fast, inhumanly fast. He cleared the 10 feet between us in a single bound, tackling me to the ground. His weight was immense, dense like wet sand. I struggled, punching at his chest, but it was like hitting a bag of cement. The tendril from his mouth lashed out, trying to force its way into my nose, into my mouth. It wanted to complete the connection. "I'm sorry, Sully," I screamed. I grabbed the heavy maglite from my belt, the one piece of gear I hadn't lost. I swung it with every ounce of strength I had left. The metal crashed into the side of his head. There was a wet crunch, and the red sphere in his left eye socket burst. Red gas hissed out. Sully shrieked, that same high-pitched biological wail I had heard in the cistern. He recoiled, clutching his face. I scrambled out from under him, kicking him in the chest to create distance. I didn't look back. I sprinted for the door marked Station 9. I hit the crash bar, and the door flew open. I fell onto a dusty subway platform, the air cool and silent. I scrambled to my feet, and slammed the door shut, jamming the maglite through the handles to bar it. From the other side, Sully threw himself against the metal. Thud, thud, then silence. I stood on the abandoned platform, listening to my own ragged breathing. I checked my reflection in the dark window of a dusty ticket booth. The red in my eyes was fading. The veins in my hand were lightening. The connection was severing. But why? I looked at my hand. The adrenaline, the physical exertion. Number it was the fresh air. A draft was coming from the tunnel ahead. Cold winter air from the surface. The colony hated the cold. It thrived in the warm. Humid dark. I had to get to the surface. Before the fever came back, before Sully found another way in. The subway platform was a ghost town, frozen in time, from the day they chained the gates 40 years ago. Advertisements for cassette tapes and long-defunct cigarette brands peeled from the tiled walls. The silence here was different. It wasn't the heavy, wet silence of the sewers. It was a dusty, hollow silence, but it wouldn't last. I could still hear them, not Sully. The others far below, through the ventilation grates on the floor of the platform, the sound drifted up. Scrape, click, scrape. The workers had found the maintenance shaft. They were climbing. They were coming for the one that got away. I limped toward the escalators, my boots crunching on broken glass. The stairs were motionless, a jagged metal spine reaching up into the darkness. At the top, I could see a faint glimmer of light, moonlight filtering through the street-level grating. Almost there, I muttered, my voice raspy. My throat felt like I had swallowed a handful of razor blades. The red veins in my arm were still visible, pulsing faintly. But the cold draft blowing down the escalator shaft seemed to be slowing the infection. The voice of the colony was a dull murmur now, like a radio left on in another room. I started to climb. My legs felt like lead. Every step was a negotiation with gravity. Clang! A vent cover on the platform behind me blew off, spinning through the air and crashing onto the tracks. I spun around, weaponless except for my utility knife. From the dark square of the vent, a pale, multi-jointed limb reached out. Then another, a worker pulled itself onto the platform, slick with slime, chittering its teeth. It was followed by two more. They moved with a terrifying, scuttling agility, claws sparking against the tile floor. Oh God, I gasped, turning and scrambling up the escalator steps on all fours. The creatures shrieked, a sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling and made my vision blur. They charged. I didn't look back. I pumped my arms, forcing my exhausted body to move. Left foot, right foot, breathe. I heard the click-clack of their claws on the metal steps behind me. They were closing the distance. Halfway up, I slipped. My knee slammed into the jagged edge of a step. Pain shot up my leg, blinding white hot. I cried out, stumbling. A claw swiped at my boot, slicing through the rubber heel. I kicked backward blindly, connecting with something soft. The creature hissed and fell back, tumbling down the stairs, taking the one behind it down in a tangle of limbs. But the third one jumped. It sailed over its fallen kin, landing on the railing beside me. It reared back, ready to strike. I braced myself for the bite. Whoosh. A train. Not a subway train. A maintenance cart. A diesel-powered rail inspector vehicle came flying down the track on the opposite side of the platform, its horn blaring. It wasn't stopping, it was just passing through the old line. The noise was deafening. The vibration shook the entire station. The worker on the railing flinched. The sonic assault disoriented it. It slipped, its claws screeching on the metal, and fell backward over the side of the escalator, dropping 20 feet to the platform below. I didn't question the miracle. I scrambled the rest of the way up the stairs, lunging for the turnstiles. I vaulted over the rusted barrier, crashing onto the mezzanine floor. The exit to the street was right there, a heavy iron gate chain shut. No, no, no. I grabbed the chain, rattling it. It was rusted solid. I looked back down the escalator. The workers were recovering. They were starting to climb again. I looked around frantically. A ticket booth. Inside, a fire axe mounted on the wall behind shattered glass. I smashed the rest of the glass with my elbow, ignoring the cuts, and grabbed the axe. I swung it at the chain on the gate. Clang, the metal held. Clang, a spark. Clang, the link snapped. I kicked the gate open and stumbled out into the cool night air. I was out. I was on the street. But as I fell onto the wet pavement, gasping for breath, I realized something terrifying. The thumping hadn't stopped. It wasn't coming from the tunnel anymore. It was coming from beneath the manhole cover in the middle of the street, and the one down the block, and the storm drain at the curb. The entire street was vibrating. The colony wasn't just in the deep sectors. It was everywhere, and it was waking up. I lay on the wet asphalt of a deserted alleyway, the cold rain mixing with the sweat and slime on my face. Above me, the city slept oblivious. A siren wailed in the distance. Police, or maybe an ambulance. A mundane sound that felt alien after the biological cacophony of the Undercity. I was out. I was safe. But as I lay there, staring up at the orange glow of the streetlights, I felt the ground tremble beneath my spine. Thump thump. It was faint, masked by the hum of traffic from the main road. But I could feel it. The veins in my left hand throbbed in sympathy. The infection was dormant, suppressed by the cold air and the distance from the mother, but it wasn't gone. I was still a receiver. I rolled onto my side and retched, spitting up red flame. I needed to get away. I needed to go to a hospital, or the police. I needed to tell someone. I pushed myself up using a dumpster for support. My legs were shaking. I looked down the alley toward the street. A utility van was parked at the curb. It was white, unmarked, idling quietly. 2 men in hazmat suits were standing by an open manhole cover, lowering equipment into the dark. I froze, shrinking back into the shadows. Department of Sanitation. Number sanitation. Didn't wear matte black hazmat gear with military-grade respirators, and they didn't carry assault rifles slung across their chests. One of the men spoke into a headset. Sector 4 breach confirmed. Biological containment protocol active. We have a runner. My blood ran cold. They knew. Copy that, the man said. Deploy the cleanup crew. If you find the carrier, sanitize on site. No witnesses, carrier. That was me. I wasn't a survivor to them. I was a loose end, a vector. I backed away slowly, my boots making no sound on the wet pavement. I slipped deeper into the alley, turning a corner into a narrow passage between 2 brick buildings. I had to hide. But where? If they were monitoring the streets, I couldn't go home. I couldn't go to the authorities. The authorities were the ones hunting me. I found myself at the back of an old industrial building. The door was rusted, the lock broken. I slipped inside, closing it gently behind me. It was a boiler room, warm, humid. Mistake. The warmth hit me instantly. The thumping in my head grew louder. The veins in my arm flared. I stumbled toward the center of the room, looking for another exit. The room was dominated by a massive rusted water filtration tank. Pipes ran from it into the floor, disappearing into the foundation. And on the side of the tank, there was a viewing port, a thick glass window designed to check the water level. I was drawn to it. The voice in my head whispered, "Look, see the truth." I wiped the condensation from the glass and peered inside. The tank wasn't filled with water. It was filled with flesh. A massive, pulsating red mass filled the interior, pressed against the glass. It was identical to the mother in the cistern, but smaller, a node, a satellite organ. And growing out of it, feeding into the city's water pipes, were thousands of hair-thin red tendrils. I realized then, with a horror that eclipsed everything else, what I was looking at. This wasn't a sewer line. This was the intake for the building's water supply. The colony wasn't just living in the waste. It had infiltrated the supply. It was filtering the water, yes, but it was also adding something. Microscopic spores, tiny red eggs. I backed away, stumbling over a bucket. I looked at the pipes running along the ceiling. They were vibrating. Thump thump. The entire city infrastructure, the sewers, the water mains, the filtration plants. It was all one massive organism. We weren't just flushing our waste down to it. We were drinking from it. We were bathing in it. The city was the host, and the Department of Defense, or whoever those men in the van were. They weren't trying to kill it. They were managing it. I heard a door open behind me, footsteps on concrete. "Heads in here," a distorted voice said. I spun around. A flashlight beam blinded me. The barrel of a rifle raised. I didn't think. I didn't beg. I ran. I scrambled up a metal ladder leading to a roof access hatch. Bullets sparked against the rungs near my feet. I threw the hatch open and burst out onto the roof, into the rain. I sprinted across the gravel surface, jumping to the fire escape of the next building. I didn't stop running until I was miles away, lost in the maze of the city. a ghost in the machine I had helped maintain. I ended up in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. A place where the clerk behind the bulletproof glass didn't ask for ID, and didn't care that I was covered in filth and shivering violently. I paid in cash, wet, crumpled bills. I had fished out of my wallet, and barricaded myself in room 104. I stripped off the shredded remains of my uniform, and stood in the shower. I turned the handle to cold. I didn't care about the shock. I needed to freeze the infection out, but as the water hit my skin, I screamed. It wasn't the temperature. It was the smell. The water coming out of the shower head didn't smell like chlorine. It smelled sweet. It smelled like copper and rotting peaches. I scrambled back, slipping on the tiles, crashing into the toilet. I stared at the shower stream. The water was clear, but the steam rising from it carried that undeniable scent. It's everywhere, I realized. It's in the grid. I crawled out of the bathroom, wrapping myself in a towel that felt like sandpaper against my feverish skin. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the television. It was off, the black screen reflecting my hollow face. My left eye was bloodshot, the pupil sluggish. The veins in my arm were a dull purple, quiescent but waiting. I reached for the nightstand, where I had dumped the contents of my pockets. My utility knife, my wallet, and a small plastic-wrapped logbook I had snatched from the desk in the utility room back in Sector 4. The room with the keypad. I hadn't looked at it then. I had just grabbed it. I tore the plastic open with trembling fingers. The pages were damp, swollen with humidity. But the ink was waterproof. It wasn't a maintenance log. It was a research journal. The cover bore the seal of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, stamped classified. I flipped through the pages. Diagrams of the tunnel systems, chemical analysis of the water, sketches of the drifters, labeled Subject 814 gestation stage. And then, a handwritten entry dated 3 months ago. Growth rate in Sector 4 has exceeded projections by 200%. The biomass requires more carbon intake to sustain filtration efficiency. Current rodent population is insufficient. Recommendation: deploy maintenance team C to the lower levels during the next storm surge. Do not issue extraction protocols. My breath caught in my throat. Maintenance team C, that was us. That was me and Sully. We weren't sent down there to clear a blockage. We were sent down there to be the blockage. We were biomass. We were food. I flipped to the next page. Note: Subject 814's neurochemical secretions are showing promising results for the pacification project. The town's aggression levels have dropped 40% since we introduced the treated water into the municipal supply. The population is docile, suggest moving to Phase 2, full integration. I dropped the book. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. The city wasn't just a host, it was a test subject. They were using the colony to drug the population. The red gas, the spores, it made you calm. It made you compliant. It made you feel connected. I looked at the glass of water sitting on the nightstand, left by the last guest or placed there by the maid. It looked innocent, clear, refreshing. But if I looked closely, I could see tiny particulates floating in it. I wasn't a carrier of a plague. I was a witness to a harvest. I went to the window and pulled back the curtain. The city lights twinkled in the distance, peaceful and serene. Millions of people sleeping soundly, dreaming dreams curated by a monster in the sewer. They would never believe me. If I went to the press, ID disappear. If I went to the police, the men in the black vans would find me. I was alone. And I was thirsty. God help me, I was so thirsty. I looked back at the glass of water. My hand reached for it, not out of logic, but out of a deep biological imperative. My veins pulsed. Thump thump, drink, the voice whispered. Join us, be at peace. I grabbed the glass. I raised it to my lips, and then I threw it against the wall. It shattered, the water splashing across the cheap wallpaper. No, I growled. Not yet. I grabbed the logbook and my knife. I put on the clothes I had stolen from a laundromat dryer on my way here. I couldn't stop it, but I could warn them. I could scream the truth until they silenced me. I opened the door to the rainy night. The air smelled of wet asphalt and something else faintly, Drifting on the wind from the storm drains came the smell of peaches. The balloons were floating up. They were coming to the surface. Phase 2 had begun. I don't live in the city anymore. I moved as far inland as I could, to a dry, arid patch of desert where the water comes from a deep well, and tastes like rust and minerals. I don't drink tap water. I boil everything. I filter it 3 times. And even then, I stare at the glass for 10 minutes before I take a sip, looking for that telltale red shimmer. I haven't seen a balloon since that night, but I see them in my dreams. Every night, I'm back in the cistern. I'm floating in the warm, dark water, surrounded by thousands of pulsing red spheres. I can hear the mother singing to me, a low, resonant vibration that rattles my bones. She tells me I'm lonely. She tells me I'm broken. She tells me that if I just let go, if I just open my mouth and breathe the water in, you'll never be afraid again. And the terrifying thing is, part of me wants to. Sometimes when it rains out here in the desert, I stand on my porch and listen. Not to the thunder, I listen to the ground, and sometimes, I swear I can hear it. Thump thump, thump thump. It's faint thousands of miles away, echoing through the bedrock, but it's there. The heartbeat of the colony. It's growing, it's expanding. The roots are spreading along the aquifers, following the water table, inching their way across the continent. I tried to publish the logbook online. I uploaded scans to forums, sent copies to journalists. Within an hour, the posts were deleted. The accounts were banned. The journalists stopped replying. 2 days ago, a black van with government plates parked at the end of my dirt driveway. It sat there for 6 hours. Nobody got out. They were just watching, letting me know they know where I am. They aren't going to kill me. Why would they? I'm part of the experiment now. I'm the control group, the one who resisted. They want to see how long I can last before the withdrawal breaks me, or before the colony finds me on its own. I still have the scar on my hand where the knife slipped. The veins around it are permanently darkened, a spiderweb of violet under the skin. When the humidity rises, it aches. It throbs in time with a rhythm that isn't my own heart. So, this is my warning, the only one I can give you before they shut me down for good. Pay attention to your water. Does it taste a little sweeter than usual? Does it smell faintly of copper or fruit? Do you find yourself feeling unusually calm, unusually compliant, even when the world is falling apart around you? And for the love of God, check your drains. If you hear a gurgling sound in the middle of the night, don't assume it's just air in the pipes. If you see something red bobbing in the toilet bowl, don't reach for it. Don't flush it. Run. Get out of the house. Burn it down if you have to, because if you see one balloon, it means the rest of them are already in the walls. It means the nursery is full, and it means the workers are coming to harvest. My name is Jack. I was a maintenance worker for the Undercity. We had one rule: do not touch the red balloons. I broke it. And now, I think we're all going to float. If you enjoyed this story, or if you're suddenly feeling a little thirsty, hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel grow, and honestly, it might be the only way to stay updated before the internet gets scrubbed. Let me know in the comments, have you ever heard strange noises in your pipes at night, or found something in the water that shouldn't be there? Share your story. We need to document the spread. And remember, if it's red, leave it dead. See you in the next nightmare.